Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I have with me two guests, Lisa Pahl and Jamie Thrower, and together they are the co-creators of the Dementia Deck. Lisa created the Death Deck and the End of Life Deck, and then she and Jamie came together to make the Dementia Deck, which is the latest offering in terms of conversation games. And we'll be talking all about how to use this card deck in order to have meaningful conversations about dementia. And this is a really powerful discussion, so I hope you enjoy it. And as always, make sure you have subscribed to this channel down below. Subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen. And go to eoluniversity.com/support if you're willing and able to make a small contribution that will help keep this channel and the podcast on the air. So we'll move on now with my conversation with Lisa and Jamie. Today, I'm very excited to welcome two special guests to the podcast, Lisa Pahl and Jamie Thrower. And Lisa has been on this podcast at least a couple of times before, if not more. And Lisa is a licensed clinical social worker and certified advanced practice hospice and palliative social worker with over 18 years in hospice and 7 in emergency medicine. She is passionate about increasing death literacy and helping people face illness, dying, and grief with courage and clarity. Lisa is the co-creator of the Death Deck, the EOL deck, and the new Dementia Deck, which we'll be talking about today. And you can learn more at the website, thedeathdeck.com. So Lisa, welcome back.
Thank you, Karen. I'm really excited to be here today.
And along with Lisa, Jamie Thrower is here for the first time on the podcast. And Jamie is a queer death doula, end of life educator, and community grief tender, serving the LGBTQ plus community in life and in death. In addition to working alongside dying people and their loved ones, Jamie also runs Queer Grief Club, an online advocacy, education, and support space for queer and trans folks. She is also the co-creator of the Dementia Deck. We'll be talking about that today, but I was just saying I'm definitely having Jamie back on so we can learn a lot more about Jamie's work. And you can go to her website, jamiethrower.com. So, Jamie, welcome.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited to get to talk with both of you about the Dementia Deck, but Lisa, I thought maybe we should start by just reminding listeners what is the Death Deck and the EOL deck, which we've talked about before on the podcast, but for anyone who's not familiar with them, maybe kind of give us the rundown of those two games.
Sure. I'm always excited to talk about the Death Deck and the EOL deck. And what's been really fun about the Dementia Deck is that it's introducing new people to our other products. So all three of our products are to help people talk through advanced care planning type conversations. And so the Death Deck is our fun and lively game. There's 118 questions. And it really runs the gamut of all things death related. The purpose of the Death Deck is to try to normalize conversations about death, dying, illness, and grief before a medical crisis or a terminal diagnosis. So we use a lot of humor, multiple choice questions, basically to try to ease people's discomfort and increase their willingness to participate in conversations that perhaps they wouldn't normally have. And then our EOL deck is our deck that launched in 2013. This is a tool that I really wanted to create for my hospice team and myself personally and other professionals, doulas, other people in this space that really helping us dig deeper into end of life preferences. And so was designed for people with serious illness to be able to talk more specifically about topics related to how do you feel about touch as you're approaching end of life? How do you feel about visitors? And give people an opportunity to have more autonomy and say in how they die. So those were our two first decks, and then the Dementia deck we just launched in September. And that is a collaboration with Compassion and Choices. And basically is helping us talk through the type of care and treatment that people would want specifically if they were living with dementia.
And so that's really important. I just wanted to give a shout out for the Death Deck and the EOL deck. They serve slightly different audiences in a way, but
Mhm.
both have been so very helpful already since they were first created in introducing all kinds of people, lay people, to conversations about death and starting with the Death Deck in, I think, a fun, easier way to open up the topic and the conversation. And so anyone who's not familiar with them, I encourage you to go to the deathdeck.com and check into it because it's a really helpful game to play with families, and we have the holiday season coming up, so something that might fit in there. So, Jamie, I'm interested to hear how you came to collaborate on the Dementia Deck and creating
Yeah.
that.
Well, Lisa and I actually met at a conference, an end of life conference, and started chatting with each other and fell in love with each other, obviously. Um, and I have a background in graphic design before I came to the end of life and death world, and have a background in photography, and just am always wanting to collaborate and use all of my different skills in this place because I feel like so many of us come from different backgrounds and we come from
Mhm.
all kinds of different places and we have all these other little skills that we can bring to each other's work. And so, um, Lisa and I kind of first started working together in just like I was helping do some little tweaks and edits for the EOL deck or for creating custom decks for people, for companies, which was really cool. And then she asked me about wanting to, if I wanted to be a part of this dementia deck that they were collaborating on with Compassion and Choices. And that to me was just like, wow, two of my favorite people coming together to create something that is so deeply needed. And so it feels like this really beautiful way of like also getting, I get to share my insight as someone who has not only worked with people who are dying or who get terminal illnesses or get serious illnesses, but I've also experienced this by losing both of my parents and knowing just like how many more conversations we could have had, how many different things we could have engaged with, and knowing that that is just such a hard place for families. And the beauty and the magic of the death deck is that it makes it approachable. You're taking a card game, something that's tangible. Like no one
Mhm.
wants to sit in front of a bunch of paperwork and just go, okay, let's like let's start. Where do you start? It's so intimidating. But just start with a card game, one that might even have a little bit of humor or just softer questions, things to kind of get you talking or get you thinking, is such a like a wonderful tool for really just kind of opening the door for those conversations for people. So I feel so grateful to play, like, I played such a little part in this dementia deck, but it feels like such like I'm so proud of the dementia deck and all that it is doing. And I just know it's going to really change a lot of people's lives because we are scared of dementia
Mhm.
and we just don't talk about it when it comes to end of life.
Mhm.
And we think that people don't have choice or they shouldn't have choice or they might not be able to have choice. And
Mhm.
there's a lot that we can do to give agency back to people.
Mhm. That's so very true. I just wanted to say, I just love that your story includes this first creativity and collaboration because I'm a firm believer that our forward path in improving end of life issues, including grief and how we handle them in our society, has to involve those two things: our
Mhm.
creativity, bringing all of our skills and our tools, whatever they are, to our work, but collaboration as well. Because when we come together and synergistically, I just think it's magic, and I think that's
Mhm.
how we're really going to make a difference over the next decade.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I could not agree more. I think that one of my favorite things about working in this space of end of life care has been the incredible people and creativity that I get to be surrounded with. And Jamie's at the top of that list, as are some other favorites of mine that I really have aligned with so deeply that I look forward to all of these collaborations. But there's so many other people out there as well who I just admire and enjoy sharing their work too. I've had the opportunity to work with Grief Dialogues and the incredible work that Elizabeth Copeland is doing within theater. And then Reimagine, I just went to another live performance of theater and talking about with Dara, who created a one-woman show. And I just think it's it's the way forward, as you said, Karen, that we can find all of these creative ways for different entry points for people to have these conversations. Because a card game isn't necessarily the entry point for all people. It might be a play, it might be a movie or a podcast or an app or something else. And so the more ways the more tools we have, the more entry points we have for people to begin having these conversations, I think the more likely we are to have a more informed public.
That's so true. And the more each of us brings our own unique perspective and talents into this field, then the more doorways we're creating for all of the people out there, because everyone is going to face death and dying some days, and we need as many different avenues for them to get information as possible. So I
Mhm.
love this that you two came together to create the Dementia Deck. But I wanted to ask either one of you or both of you. I guess we could start with you, Lisa, because you started the creation of what inspired the Dementia Deck in the first place.
Yeah, well, I have to give kudos to Compassion and Choices because they really um, helped with the idea of this. So, as Jamie mentioned, we provide custom decks for businesses, agencies, individuals who are looking to basically co-brand their use their branding on our decks to use as marketing material, help get the word out in a way that is helpful and informative for people. And so during our last run of the Death Deck, custom deck for Compassion and Choices, Jessica and Pino had requested that we create a dementia specific card, which actually brought up to me that that was an oversight in creating the Death Deck, that we didn't include dementia as part of that conversation. Excuse me. And so we created a dementia specific card, um, and that went out. And then basically, Compassion Choices came back and said, "Hey, what if we create an entire deck?" And so, Compassion and Choices has a really incredible dementia directive. They call it the Dementia Values and Priorities tool, which you can do online or you can print it out. And it basically attaches to your advanced directive and it walks through these decisional moments of when people might want to choose comfort measures, or they might want to choose to continue as before and pursue all measures to extend their life and kind of along that continuum. And so, what we decided to do was basically pull some inspiration from the Dementia Values and Priorities tool, make it into a more approachable, engaging card game to help again, as we talked about, there might be some people who just want to get down to that paperwork and they say, this is sufficient for me. I don't need a card game. But there's a lot of other people who are reluctant to just sit and get started with something as intense as that. And so we wanted to create an easier, more interactive, and engaging way for people to begin including dementia in their end of life planning.
Mm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'm sure Jamie, as a photographer, an artistic person, you understand how really utilizing things like the arts, like stories and games and questions, how much people open up when we use that approach to work with them, how it kind of helps them engage with a different part of themselves.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting to see just how we can take, certain questions and transform them into a card game or into something they can hold or utilizing color, utilizing like I love the just branding of the death deck and all the other decks that have come from it because they're simple and approachable and also like it's it, it's something that is also going to be legible and easy for people to read for people they're not like really deep questions that are going to confuse people so it really like I think again like using creativity like Elisa inherently is already creative and was and is a creative person by have like creating the death deck and all of these things and so it feels like such a wonderful place for me to come in and just offer my support and advice on questions or different things or colors, color schemes and design. So that it's not just, of course, like an amazing tool, but it's also something that's beautiful and fun um, and interactive.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah,
know, oh,
I was just going to do
I was gonna hold that up
that.
too. No, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, it was really fun, the creative process of this, of coming up with our logo. We're trying to kind of keep consistent, right? And so Jamie and I had a really great time with, what colors. You think about all these design elements and what is appealing, what's the mood, what do we want to evoke, what feelings do we want to evoke in people as they're answering these questions. And so yeah, my creativity tends to be more wordy, and my ability to visualize things, and that's just not my strong suit. And so having Jamie be so forward in all of that, in addition to that, she's a beautiful wordsmith and helped a ton with the questions themselves and editing and thinking creatively about how to word some questions. But yeah, I'm always, again, this is the beauty of collaboration, finding people whose skills complement your own and fill those gaps of the things that you're less equipped in.
And for those just listening, I wanted to say Lisa and I both just simultaneously held up the death deck or the dementia deck design, which has an elephant on it. And it really struck me when you mentioned, Lisa, that the original, the death deck and EOL deck did not include dementia originally, that in a way, dementia is an even more invisible elephant in the room. And I look back
Yeah.
even at the podcast that I've done some on
Mhm.
dementia, but it really strikes me how a
Mhm.
lot of times we avoid that particular discussion because it's a really challenging one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I will say that there is one death deck question that says, which illness do you fear most? And dementia is one of the answers. And in my experience, that is almost always the answer chosen by
Hmm.
someone. And so that does tell me that that dementia is, and I might even argue, even more feared than death in a lot of
Yeah.
situations. And so that really is the impetus of the dementia deck, is that one, let's talk about things that scare us because they become less scary. And let's give people some autonomy to be able to say, I have taken care of family members who have lived with dementia. I have witnessed people, professionally or personally, who have lived with dementia, and I have thoughts about what I would want for myself if I was in that situation. And so we might not always know what those thoughts completely are. And that's why we need different tools to help us kind of think through what those moments might be that we can have decisions made that align with our values.
Yeah. And something that has now been coming to me, which I think is really interesting, is that there are some disease processes that part of the kind of terminal or end of life phase is a small kind of acute phase of dementia, right? Like something like
Mm,
Parkinson's,
mhm,
something
mhm,
that's more neurodegenerative. And people aren't necessarily talking about that. So they're getting to this end of life phase and then they're going, oh my gosh, I'm so out
mhm,
of my depth here. I didn't
mhm,
even think about what this was going to be like, and I never talked to my person about how I could interact with them or how I could um like support them in that space. So it is like such an important part to think of in end of life, even if dementia isn't necessarily part of your diagnosis, but just
mhm,
imagining and starting to think about these things as less of like, this is such a terrible thing to think about, but more of like, how
mhm,
can I feel a little more empowered, a little more prepared? How could my family or the people around me feel a little more resourced?
mhm.
And I think that that's like the beauty of this deck too, is that it's giving people some skills and some things to think about in ways that people can interact with their loved ones too. So it's such an educational tool.
That's such a good point, Jamie, because so many caregivers may feel blindsided when their loved one reaches that phase at the very end of
Mhm,
life who have a different diagnosis. They weren't expecting that they wouldn't be able to ask questions or wouldn't be able to make decisions for themselves.
Right.
And the caregivers don't feel prepared for that.
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah. And I think, the other thing that Jamie kind of highlighted is, you know, we worked really hard to find the tone for this deck. There's a tiny bit of humor just in some of the answers when we could. But we certainly in no way wanted to have any questions that might elicit that we were trying to poke fun at a topic as serious as dementia, but more, just some of the answers having a little tongue-in-cheek kind of tone to them. But we also wanted to make sure that it wasn't as though we were just talking about treatment options. We wanted to talk about quality of life and ways that we can stay connected to people living with dementia. And as Jamie mentioned, kind of giving a little bit of education in some of those prompts, some suggestions in some of those prompts. So, because at the end of the day, we know that people the numbers, there's different studies coming out or projections coming out, but it's close to 50%, of us will live with dementia if we reach 85 years old or some number around that. And so when we think about that, um, it just becomes more of a fact of life, right? This is likely to happen to, you know, multiple members in my family. And so let's just begin talking, preparing, planning, and through all of that, being less tight and fearful in by having these conversations now and often, early and often.
Such a good point, because most of us can say we don't know. We don't know if we will go down that path
Mhm.
as we get older and closer to the end of life. But all of us, as you were saying, probably fear that we could. We fear that happening. And what better way to address the fear than to start thinking and talking about it now, so we at least feel like we've imagined it and we've thought through some of our choices and what that might look like. It seems like that could be comforting to all of us.
Mhm.
So, and that made me initially, I was thinking, well, I guess this is for people who've been diagnosed with dementia, but not really. It probably should be a game that's played by everyone as we start to get older.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Actually, we were playing the game the other day on Zoom or on Instagram Live or something, and we asked a question. One of the questions was about like what would be, and I'm gonna botch the question, but it was something like, what is something that you would do, an activity that maybe you would like to do or someone could do for you, put for in front of you, that might help soothe you if you're agitated or all these different things. And so when I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, I really love flower arranging. It's like
Mhm.
so peaceful and meditative. And then as I was doing, I'm like making these little Christmas crafts right now. And I was like, you know what? Someone could just put me in front of a thing of sequins and some beads, and I could probably do
Mm.
that. But I'm thinking
Mhm.
about this even now of like, now I'm thinking these are things that can help me now, that can help my
Mm.
nervous system now, that can help me in times of overwhelm or times of just like, ooh, I really feel a little disconnected from reality right now. I need to just like center myself. And so even just starting to look at the ways in which like our nervous systems and our brains and what comforts us, what songs we love right now, what brings back a nostalgic memory, like that even is preparing me for what end of life could look like whenever that happens. And so I'm always kind of making these mental notes now of like, yeah, what are these soothing and comforting things that I could offer myself? And, what things might bring back memory, what things might
Mhm.
spark connection with people.
Mm.
So it's really cool to be able to think of that, in my 30s versus, playing this game much later in life when I'm maybe like focusing on trying to really plan for what my end of life might look like. So I think it's like a game that anyone can play at any time, and it's all such valuable information.
Mhm. Yeah, I like what you just said, Jamie, because I think that we spend a lot of time. Well, actually, let me go back. I think that the two things that I think about and talk about a lot as it relates to kind of preparing for end of life is, nurturing relationships because we know we need people to show up for us when we need them, right? And so nurture not in a like manipulation way, but just like nurturing relationships gives us that support system when things get hard. But the other thing that I have been thinking about a lot more as I approach turning 50 is the activities that I'm doing and what can I do as I age, Because for me, coping strategies and dealing with life has often involved a lot of exercise. And so, as my knees start to hurt and my hip starts to hurt and these other things, right? It's like, okay, I can't do that anymore. I can't do this anymore, or I have to adjust that. And so it becomes things like, okay, I love to puzzle. I'm taking walks. I love flowers like you, Jamie. And so, looking at gardening and some of these activities that we tend to do more as we age, or bird watching, right? And so I think that those are the things that will get us through our aging years and our illness years, whether that is dementia or heart failure or cancer or whatever it is that we will be dealing with. Um, those activities that don't require the body of a 25-year-old are what we want to like be building on.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's so true and such a good point. It's kind of an approach to life in general that we
Mhm.
develop our skills and our toolkits knowing things will change as we get
Mhm.
older in age. We don't know
Mhm.
exactly all the changes that will come,
Mhm.
but the more tools we have, the better prepared we are for the
Mhm.
changes we face. And I wanted to ask about really how to use the deck, how you
Mhm.
recommend using the deck, because there is a person in my extended family who was just recently diagnosed with dementia. And I would love to be able to introduce the dementia deck to
Mhm.
them, to her and her partner and their family. But I have no idea how to do it. I just wanted to ask you, like, how do you recommend bringing it up, sharing it, and then even kind of guiding people through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so it is different. Um, well, I'll start by saying I always encourage people to stack the deck of any of our decks. So meaning you know the person or people that you are going to be engaging with and um, pulling out cards that you think they might not align with or and removing them from the deck or hand selecting, let's say 10 cards and saying, these are the cards we're going to work with today. Um, Again, because not everything is made for everyone. And now that's kind of general playing. If you want to be introducing the dementia deck with someone living with dementia, I recommend starting with the pink cards. So the pink cards are open-ended, and they tend to be focusing more on quality of life and tend to be a little bit more of a softer entry point into conversations around dementia. So my friend, a college friend of mine, ended up engaging his mom, who's living with dementia, in some activity with the. Let me start that over again. Yeah, so recently my a friend from college reached out to me and he had played the dementia deck with his mom who is living with dementia. And what he shared with me was that the card that says tell me a story and it reads, many people living with dementia enjoy recalling stories from their past. A story or event from my earlier years that I would love to revisit through my life is. And so he asked his mom this question. Now, a couple of things that I'll tell you about what I know about him and his mom and their relationship is that she is very open to conversations about the fact that she has dementia, that she knows she's going to need more care. They're talking through what those plans are going to be. And she was open to these conversations. So that's an important piece. Um, but with this card, he said that he learned so much and his about his mom's she's an immigrant and so she learned a lot about her immigration story and their time together in her country of origin. And so what he said from that is that it just gave a really beautiful entry point of setting the stage of, okay, now we've had some storytelling, and then kind of priming to some of the other questions that get more into planning. So I think there's another question that I really love that Jamie was talking about that's things I love to do. And it says, if I'm living with dementia, please help me find ways to enjoy what I do. So, two hobbies or activities that I want to always continue are blank and blank. So, this is another good entry point where getting people to be talking through basically what do they hope that we continue to help them participate in, regardless of dementia, how advanced dementia is. What are they looking for in terms of maintaining those activities? So that would be my suggestion. Once people begin talking, often they're more open to going a little further. Um, I would also say that we can't predict and we don't know exactly how any particular family member will respond to things we say and do, right? And so we can go with our intention um, and and be willing to pivot if it doesn't, feel right for that person, and potentially try again, at another time.
Yeah, I mean, so much, I would say so much of any end of life work, any kind of like trying to approach people with paperwork, with planning, with any, difficult or maybe complicated conversation is that we have to stretch ourselves a little creatively sometimes to
Mhm.
get people to engage. We have to try again and again consensually, but like, sometimes we have to introduce the material in a different way, or we have to let them sit with it for a little bit and then warm up to it and then like come back and be like, hey, so did you ever think about that card game that I mentioned to you about dementia, the Dementia Deck? Have you thought about it anymore, or would you be interested?
Mhm.
And I think even especially for someone like you to be in this world and to be able to be like, I heard about this new thing. Like, what do you think about it? I think just even introducing ideas to people to not even necessarily be like, you should do this thing, but just be like, what do you think about this? How might you use this? Is this something that you're interested in? But I think for me, when I'm thinking about how to use this card deck with both my clients, but also I have someone in my life who is on the very precipice of being diagnosed with dementia. And and she is someone that I will have to be very careful with how I engage in conversations. So,
Mhm.
just thinking about the ways in which like I can use my work as a death worker to be like, hey, I found out about this new thing and I'm like curious how you feel about it. And then also to just gently kind of like show suggestions of things, but also to empower people or remind people that like if they get a diagnosis of dementia, it is not the end of the world. It does not mean that they have to like just throw away all of their dignity and their autonomy and all of these things, that there are still so many choices that they get to make. There is still a joyful life ahead of them.
Mhm.
And that they can also, there are ways to engage with the conversation so that we can really make decisions or help them make decisions that are going to help them live with the most autonomy in this disease that does take away so much. And so I think
Mhm.
there is that like, we can still, there's a lot we can to participate in, and there's a lot to grieve, and we can hold it all kind of together. And
Mhm.
yeah, it is a really great tool. And like Lisa said, like being able to look through the deck yourself or stack the deck, pick the questions that might feel like the best entry point. Maybe the question um, about like feeding tube or support is like not the one to start with, but
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
starting with the story, starting with a more open-ended one, can
Mhm.
be a really great way to start.
That's such a good suggestion because, and actually, that's the card that I pulled that I wanted to ask you about the card, Tell Me a Story, because
Mhm.
I was thinking,
Mhm.
even when we're close to someone, everyone has stories that we've probably never heard before. And
Mhm.
it's a great way to open things up and even just to spend time with your loved one listening and giving them a chance to talk. But I think I saw something elsewhere too about, do you have any experience with dementia, with another person with dementia in your life previously? I think I saw that
Yeah.
somewhere, but to get at the idea, what are their preconceived ideas about what dementia is and how much fear or pain are they carrying around it, that we could start talking about now too, because we might be able to help dispel some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so one of the questions is someone I know lived with dementia. Based on that, if I am diagnosed, A, I want my family to approach my situation in a similar way. B, I ask that my family makes different decisions about my care. Or C, a little bit of both, a caregiver cocktail. See, that's our little gentle attempt at humor right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think, what I like about this question is in a group setting, people can answer that question however they want. And, they might just say A, B, or C. And that might be the end of the conversation, depending on how you're structuring the game and who you're playing with. But for many people, it prompts people to talk about why they're answering A, B, or C, right? And so, and it gets people thinking about, well, like in my case, my grandma lived with dementia for 9 years. And in most ways, I would say my answer is A, I would want my family to approach my situation in a similar way because she wanted to be at home and she was able to stay at home with because she has had or she had 7 children and they all lived locally and so they could take care of her. And so when I answer this question, I say, well, I would like A, but I don't think it's realistic because I have
Mm.
one child and I live away from my family. And so it makes me think like, okay, I would like, so then it just kind of launches into further discussion and planning and for many people, you know, one of the big reasons that I wanted to create this deck is working in hospice for so long. Families will tell me all the time, my dad didn't want to live like this. I know he wouldn't have wanted to live like this. And then the second part of that statement is, how do I keep this from happening to me? And so while we cannot necessarily, I'm using quotes here, keep dementia from happening to us, we can we can have some say in the care we want, in the treatment we want, at what point we would choose comfort care only, at what point we might want to come off of medications that may be keeping us alive. At what point we wouldn't want cancer treatment if we were diagnosed, if we're living with dementia. So I think those are the things we're trying to help people kind of tease out is if you happen to be a person who wants to live as long as possible at all costs, then you're going to answer the questions in a different way than people who say, you know what, dementia is a diagnosis that I've witnessed a lot of family members, and I would like to live as short a period of time as possible if I have that diagnosis. And those are kind of the extreme, and there's mostly 100 shades of gray in between those binaries. But those are the discussions we're trying to help people have.
And the best part is that there's no wrong answer, right? Because there it is,
Mhm.
we are helping people put together their own answers, their own kind of almost like a guidebook. Like
Mhm.
as a death doula, I'm always like, we can take the dementia deck and we can take all your answers and we can write them down. And basically, we're creating a little guidebook for
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
caregivers, for the people around you, for yourself of like, this is something that's helpful for me. When this happens, I don't want this. Remind me of this story. Here are some things that I really want to keep doing. And when I can't physically keep doing them, here's a like something that we could reimagine. So I'm
Mhm.
still like, doing busy work while I'm sitting or something. Like
Mhm.
there are so many creative and wonderful ways that I've seen people work with dementia. Um, and I think that for people who do work in dementia or work with folks who have dementia, there is such a like, there can be like a real magic and special, like you are really living in the present with that person in that
Mm.
very present moment. But
Mhm.
we are just so attuned to being fearful and feeling like it is something that it just puts someone in a different world almost. But when we find more ways to step up and be in their world and find ways to like engage with them in their world, it can really make such a just a more peaceful and less kind of scary and intense environment for all the caregivers and all the people around too. And I think so that's both like we are empowering the person, we're also empowering the people around them
Mhm.
too.
It's
Mm.
so true. And we might find out that there are simpler ideas and simpler solutions to things than we may have imagined. And I remember with one of our patients. His wife told us that he loved to play golf, and she had a video of a golf tournament that was like the highlight of his career as a golfer, apparently. And she played that video for him every single day. He watched the same video every day, and it made him so happy. It brought him
Yeah.
back to this amazing, wonderful time in his life. And she said at first, I thought, like, does that seem like I'm not creative? I'm not thinking of different things to do every day. But no, he loved it. This was the high point for him, and a memory he wanted to be able to keep cherishing and remembering. And so I just think when we listen to the stories, when we take the time to have these conversations, we may be able to see a path that we hadn't even imagined before that will be helpful.
Mm. Oh, I love that story, Karen. I can just picture, how, and it immediately prompted me to think, oh, what would my golf show be? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if it's happened yet, but yeah, I think, and I love what you said, Jamie. I think, there are, I want to use the right language as I'm talking about this, but there are gifts that we can receive, caring for someone with dementia, or, being present with our family members living with dementia. And I do think that living in the present, being able to connect in the underlying emotions that people are feeling. Sometimes we get caught up in facts and whether the person is thinking about things, or talking about things in a factual way, when really that's not the point. The facts are probably going to be mixed up, but the emotions underneath, the human that we have known and loved, is right there in front of us. And so, how do we continue to connect to those feelings, to that person? Um, and and again, that's one of the things that we tried really hard to do with the dementia deck, was to highlight some of those aspects, as well as the nuts and bolts of advanced care planning.
Mm. And it occurs to me that there is a window in after a diagnosis like this, there is a window of time in which these conversations will be the most effective and you'll learn the most information. And if you pass outside of that window, it may be too late to be
Hmm.
able to have the discussion. So it seems like we need to be mindful of using this deck earlier, as early as possible. And even, I think, for lots of us, before we have a diagnosis,
Hmm.
you know, um, just so that we feel prepared and we feel like we've addressed things that could happen.
Hmm. Well, and in my dream world, we're having these conversations, now, or I've played with my parents. We've also completed the dementia directive through Compassion and Choices. Um, but my goal or my plan is to play again if they receive a diagnosis. Continue to having these conversations, but it's far easier to return to a conversation than it is to initiate a conversation when once we have a diagnosis of any sort. And so, with the death deck and dementia deck, we really are trying to help people before that diagnosis. That's the ideal time. And then return to the topics, as people age, as health issues increase, or as situation changes, that we're continuing the conversation.
And I'd like to say, as a physician, ideally, healthcare providers would have these very same conversations with
Mhm.
patients, but I fear that most often that does not happen in the medical office. So we really need the conversations to be happening at home then with family
Yeah.
members.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that the time that physicians get to spend with their patients is only getting shorter. And so it really does become difficult to have these in-depth. And we also don't have the same type of relationships with our primary care physicians because we're seeing them for a brief period. So we want to empower the public to be having these conversations, the grandkids, the kids, the death doulas among us, that the people working in end of life care who are seeing the need and want to bring those conversations home and to their community.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of these decks, the death deck, the UL deck, the dementia deck, all of them play a role in that. And um, so I think for people listening, maybe the death deck is kind of a starter deck for if,
Hmm.
for people who've never really had conversations about any
Hmm.
of these topics before. But if you have someone in your family who's been diagnosed with dementia, then there's not a lot of time to waste. So I would
Hmm.
encourage people get the deck and at least look through it because I bet you will find questions that feel just right
Absolutely.
to you. Like, oh, that's a question I want to ask. That's something we could talk about that my dad would be comfortable with, or my aunt, or whoever.
Hmm.
Right. Like, even if you're not playing the game with them specifically, being able to have the deck and look through the questions and start to realize even what kind of questions you might want to ask your person, or what feels like, or as you're starting to see what is happening for their body and their mind and their aging process, like, oh, this might be an important question or important thing to know down the road. So I want to make sure and ask this question. So there's just so many ways that this desk can be used and can be utilized as a resource in education um, and even just like a starting ground for more um, just bringing in more care or more support for folks who are supporting someone with dementia or someone who has just been diagnosed or is living with dementia.
Hmm.
And it seems
Yeah,
like go ahead.
I was just going to say one
Sorry,
last
Lisa.
thing.
Yeah.
One last thing. My parents, because my grandma lived with dementia for 9 years, um, my parents have always told me how fearful they are that they, will be living with dementia. And when we were able to go through Dementia Deck questions and then complete Compassion and Trace's Dementia Values and Priorities tool, and I did it as well. And so we were all having these conversations together and completing the paperwork. When we were able to look at it and see that how and through our conversations also hear how aligned we all are, it has given them a lot of peace of mind because I am their healthcare decision maker, and so to know that instinctively I would be making decisions that are aligned with how they think about many of these topics has reduced some of that fearfulness, and so that's what I really want. Even if no one has been diagnosed with dementia, so many of us are fearful of it. And so, again, having conversations, bringing things out into the open, beginning to think and talk through these topics can help us carry less of that fear and feel more empowered instead.
And I love what you said that you answered the questions too, and you filled out the
Mhm.
paperwork too. I think that's really valuable to remember. We're not singling out one person as this is about you because we think you have dementia or it's about
Mhm.
all of us who want to talk about this topic together and how we feel. And it seems like having the deck on hand is so helpful because you're not approaching them like from your own head. I'm wondering what you want. You're saying, hey, I was looking at this card deck and there's a question in here that asks this, and I've never thought about that for myself before. What do you think about it? And let them know how you would answer for yourself. That takes the spotlight off of that one person, and it just becomes these are questions for all of us to think about and discuss.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that with again, all the tools that we've created, um, answering yourself is is incredibly important in this. Otherwise, you are putting someone on the spot. You're also kind of assuming that you're not going to die or you're not going to live with this. It's like,
That is true.
let's talk about you, not me. I don't have to get vulnerable here. So yeah, this is a conversation. And the very last thing I'll say is just that these conversations bring us closer together. Talking about real topics, talking about things that scare us, talking about things that we don't talk about very often. It's intimate, it's vulnerable, it connects us. It again helps us to continue nurturing those relationships. And I think, in 2025, we need all of that we can get right now.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, such a good point. Oh gosh, well, this has been such a good conversation, and I want to thank you both so much for coming and talking to me about the dementia deck. And Jamie, I'll have you back on before we know it.
Awesome.
I'm going to invite you back. And Lisa, I'm so glad that you were able to join the conversation once again. And I'll remind everyone to go to thedeathdeck.com. Is that the best place to go to order the deck?
Yes. You
And
can get all of our products at thedeathdeck.com.
And then maybe I can leave in the show notes a link to Compassion and Choices because you were
Uh-huh.
mentioning their tools as well. And also you have resources in the deck, right? You have
Hmm.
Yeah,
resources.
there's a link right to the Compassion and Choices Dementia Priorities tool,
Hmm.
right? So people can use the deck, and then once they've kind of gone through and talked it out, they can go fill out their advanced directive or the Dementia Values and Priorities tool and add it to their advanced care directive
Hmm.
right from the deck. So that's again, it's like this. It's a tool of action as well of like, okay, you've had this conversation and now you can like put that into writing. You can
Hmm.
record those answers somewhere that's going to be really helpful for you down the line.
And that's a perfect point. The conversation is the first step, but then put it into writing using that tool,
Hmm.
and you will have a valuable document that will really help guide decision making in the
Yes,
future.
Hmm.
Well, thank you both. Gosh, this hour just flew by.
it
Thank you
sure
both
did.
so
It
much.
did. Thank you,
And
Karen, for having us.
oh, you're so welcome. It's been my pleasure.